Good morning or afternoon or evening, depending where in the world you are joining us from. This is our first in the series of ShapingEDU Lives, all about connecting our tools and our educational practice. My name is Laura Geringer. I'm the community manager with ShapingEDU. And just before we kick things off, I want to share a little bit about ShapingEDU for those who are joining for the very first time. ShapingEDU is a global community of thousands of change makers, educators, technologists, industry partners from around the globe, all passionate about shaping the future of learning in the digital age. We are hosted under the auspices of Arizona State University, but we're an open community, and I see faces from a wide number of states joining us here today. We will be giving this over to Tom in just a moment, but a quick announcement. Our next large event will be an unconference taking place July 20th through 23rd, entirely virtually, where we will be taking a set of wicked problems, these problems with complexities, with deep underlying tensions, and wrestling with them to create something actionable. So you are more than welcome to join us. I'll put a link to register in the chat. But without further ado, I will hand it over to Tom. Tom is an author and a storyteller in residence with ShapingEDU, as well as an educator. And he's going to be taking us through the next 90 minutes or so as we work with tools and pedagogies and do some hands-on designing. Hello, Tom.
Hi everyone. Welcome. This is just a warning. I see lots of boxes and pictures, which is okay. Audio is fine, but I am going to make you work a little bit today. A good chunk of this today is going to be based on your work and or our work collectively, and is really in keeping with the ShapingEDU mindset of, you know, we are a community and we're a community of explorers and learners. And so my job is to frame and guide the discussion in certain ways, but your job is to bust up against the frame. We will pivot as necessary based on where this goes. One of the influences I have in terms of, you know, my own work in terms of innovation and thinking about how we make change and so on and so forth is Stephen Johnson, and he always he spoke of three different kinds of networks. One is the aerial or gaseous network, which is, you know, there's all these ideas floating around out there, but they never achieve purchase. So therefore they just stay ideas and they never actually make anything happen. And then there's the solid network at the other end of the spectrum, which is, you know, a rigid network. I think we all know those in our institutions and whatnot. Oh, this is the way this is always done. We're not going to change. And the problem with that is it's, you know, inflexible and doesn't really respond well to change, which obviously is something that we have to deal with. And in the middle is the liquid network, and that's your really your ideal. You want to create structures that allow ideas to flow, but also a way to capture those ideas like a river, and that those ideas are flowing in a certain direction instead of just sort of evaporating in the air. And so that's always a struggle with distributed communities like ShapingEDU. The gaseous part is actually the easy one. We generally don't have too much trouble with the solid networks, but this is yet another attempt to create a liquid network of ideas. So let me, without further ado, go into the inevitable introductory slideshow, just so we kind of know where we're all going, so I can help establish those, so I can establish the, you know, the environment in which our ideas will hopefully flow into the future. Okay, so let me have a nice. Okay, so let's see. I always forget to do this, and I regret not pulling up the chat window. Now I can't. Okay, where's? All right, there we go. And make sure I don't do something unexpected here. All right. I will endeavor to keep one weather eye on the chat, but at any point, feel free to unmute and say, "Hey, Tom, I don't understand," or "You're full of crap," or whatever you like, and I will. We can talk about it. So, I will endeavor. I'll let Laura sort of keep on top of the participants coming and going. Okay, so let me back up the clock here a little bit. Last year, I started working on something that we call the teaching toolset triangle, and we did some live sessions on that. And it was kind of a first, it wasn't intended to be a first draft, but it obviously, like many things in the digital world, it's become more of, it's had to iterate and pivot. A lot of these ideas were initially shaped even before the pandemic, but the toolset triangle was something that was kind of a direct response to the pandemic and remote teaching. But what I was trying to do with that project was to understand how our tools affected how we actually taught. And to give people an insight, an analysis of where our tools, certain kinds of tools tended to push instruction in certain ways. And for this, I used a categorization which Diana Laurillard, who you're going to hear about a number of times today, used to explain different approaches to teaching and learning. And she has 4 different topics. They're instructionism, or 4 different methods. Instructionism, which is, it's in crude terms, it's basically the lecture method. Sociocultural, which is getting students to, basically you're throwing ideas into groups of students and they're collaborating. It's, group work writ large. Constructionism, sociocultural is related to Vygotsky, if you're wondering there. Constructionism, which is largely identified with Edith Harel and Seymour Papert, is the idea that you give individual students projects and they learn by doing. It's very much a hands-on, project-driven method of teaching. And then collaborative, which is kind of a mashup of socioculture and constructionism, where you kind of have both of those. But all 3 of the ones, except for the very first one, are very much student-driven in their focus. The problem with that is it tells you what you're doing. It's an analysis of getting people to what they're doing, but what it doesn't tell you is what to do. And so this year, what I've decided to do is shift things into a more less analytical and more proactive. That analytical part is important. I think that's something we definitely need to understand. I'm going to need to revisit that in a certain way. We did a big survey. I had a big survey, which I think 4 people filled out last year, which hats off and thank you. I don't know if anybody who did it is in the group. And that's still very useful information and work, but it was always sort of intended to be part of a conversation process. And that was hard to pull off given the circumstances. So what I've done this year, there's a couple of problems with the old model. One was it's a little too simple. And so I have changed the way the model works a little bit in terms of thinking about how to group the tools. Because the problem there, I was kind of grouping them on the traditional axes of stuff that's in person versus online, and then adding XR, extended reality, to that. And that's how I got to the 3 different areas. The problem with that is that it ignores the factor of time. And I felt like this is something, especially in the last year, that has really been beating me over the head, going, okay, we need to start thinking about time differently too. And so if you split each of those areas based on time, you get a different kind of model. And so what I've done this year with the new kind of model is, and the way these hackathons are organized, is we're going to look at tools that are used for live interaction, which is what we're doing today. We're going to look at tools which we can use asynchronously. In other words, people can be working on when they're not all in a Zoom session together or sitting in a classroom together. And that's the next hackathon. And then we're going to have an XR hackathon at the end of June. And that's the combinatorial, because I think XR really starts to make us ask some serious questions about this whole dichotomy even on time. So we're kind of playing with the universe here a little bit. But then the other part of this was I really wanted to talk about actual things that we're trying to get our students to do and to think about. And that's where these pedagogical practices come into play. Now, these are also from Diana Lorillard. They're a little later in the in her practice. She wrote a great book, Teaching as a Design Science. It came out a little less than a decade ago now. But in that, she identifies the 6 areas of things that we want our students to be able to do. And I'll come back to those in a minute. And I want to add one more to that, and that is a motivational one, which I call curiosity. But you know, one of the things we can do is we can expand these categories. All of this stuff is negotiable. So here's how to think of the new categories. The brown categories, one way to think about this is earth and sky. So the brown categories or tan categories are what I call earth. They're physical objects that you can touch, that you can be in a room, you can be messing around with, you know, put your hands on, right? The blue categories are things that you can't touch. They're in the sky, they're in the interwebs, right? So there are ways that we can connect with each other that do not involve us all being in the same place at the same time. And then the green category, again, is that XR category, which I think kind of messes with the paradigm a bit, but we'll get to that in Hackathon 3. So I don't want to spend too much time debating XR yet. We'll get there, don't worry. So then I came up with this grid. And so in the traditional quadrant, space takes priority in a sense, or it becomes more evident than time. And these are physical environments. I mean, these are instructional rooms, basically, as you want to think about it. The idea is that everybody's in the same place at the same time. Everybody's physically close together. And that's where you get the proximate synchronous. These often involve considerable resource expenditures. I've been involved in a number of building projects. I can talk through all of that you know, how difficult it is. The good news is it's gotten a lot easier to do this stuff than when I started. I remember when I first became a technology director 15 years ago, my overwhelming goal was to make sure every classroom had a minimum level of technology, which was basically a projector and a place to plug your computer in. You know, it took us 3 years to get there with 150 some odd classrooms. So, but you know, and it was a considerable expenditure. It was a $250,000 investment to get even to that level. The other one, which is the one we've kind of been living in a lot this last year, is the conversational quadrant. Again, everybody's in the same place. I mean, I'm sorry, everybody's in the same time, but not necessarily in the same place. Okay. So, and that you're having conversations and doing the kind of things you would normally do or traditionally do in a physical room, but you're doing them remotely. Okay. So that's the top 2 boxes here are the ones we're going to be dealing with today. Just real quick again, in the informal ones, you still have physical space, but the time is variable. People get together when they can, and they're working on, you know, when it's convenient to the student. The student is very much student driven. The same thing in theory can be said for presentational. It's just online. And then the combinatorial, again, I think we're kind of mixing those 2 realities together. We're blending them in a way. I don't know if plus is the right word, the right symbol for that, but I don't think there's a mathematical symbol for blended. Maybe there is. I went into government because I never got the advanced math stuff. So I'll let Ruben to correct me on that one, but. Okay, so let's talk about Lorillard's 6 types of learning real quick. This is a table from the book. This is also on the Miro canvas, so you can reference it at any time. So she has these six things that she thinks all instruction, and she doesn't just think this, she's done considerable research on this, but that all instruction revolves around at some level. There's the acquisition of knowledge, and you can see she breaks these up with conventional technology versus digital technology. There's inquiry, which is acquisition is reading stuff that's given to the students in a sense, in some ways, or consuming stuff that you've curated for the students. Inquiry is more research, and being able to parse research, and digital literacy and all that sort of stuff falls into some level of inquiry. And practice, which is, it's practice. It's them practicing what they're doing. Production, which is an outcome of their work, and how is that saved? How has that become a part of their permanent building blocks? Discussion, that's pretty obvious in terms of people being able to talk to each other, and then working together on projects, collaboration. And again, as I say, I want to add this issue of motivation because I think it's very important. And it's not that she ignores this; it's certainly covered, but it's a little bit off of what she's talking about when she's talking about her 6 types of learning. But I think there has to be a certain level of fascination for exploration for all of this to come together, especially for it to be student driven and we keep talking about learner centric and student driven. And I think a lot of times what I'm building toward in my classes that I really struggle with is this curiosity factor. It's getting that motivation going, getting that, cranking the wheel, because the other things I can set them up. But if, the old phrase of, you can lead a horse to water, but, you can't make her drink. With curiosity, that's the key thing, that's the thirst. You've got to put that in there somehow. And so can we use digital? The question I'm asking with that is, to what extent can we use these tools to get them excited about that, doing the other things, right? Whatever they may be. So our mission today is going to be tying these together. And now this is, again, all of the things, and I'll come back to the ones that we're looking at specifically today. But what I like to do, or like the groups to do, is to take the 2 boxes we're working on. Again, we're focusing on traditional and conversational today, and come up with ways either that you have tried or have thought through in terms of thinking about trying to get to one of these 7 things, and then provide some connective tissue. I'm not expecting a book chapter or anything like that here. A few sentences is perfectly fine. But I want this to be us telling stories to each other and capturing them. And over the course of the summer, the idea is we're going to continue to capture these stories and build toward a final project. Okay. So over the course of the summer, we will do all 5 of these boxes, and in the last piece, we're taking them apart now, but at the end we're going to put them all back together again, and hopefully create a set of anti-fragile tools. Because if we do this right and we're really thoughtful about how we construct our tool set environments, this makes them a lot less vulnerable to the kind of shocks that we've seen in the last year. Those institutions that had robust sets of tools at their disposal, I think the faculty at those institutions had a lot less trouble transitioning to the sudden remote teaching, especially last spring, than the faculty whose institutions rely on, 2 tin cans and a string for communication. And so part of this is going to be to figure out what an ideal set of tools is that gets us the most hits, that's the most efficient way of getting there, is also cost effective. I think that's a big part of this. We can't ignore that. And come up with a set of, with a guide. At the end of this whole process, the idea is to build toward a guide. So today we're doing the synchronous tool sets. And this is what I call digital constructivism. So a few weeks ago, I wrote an article in eCampus, which I can put a link to, talking about the 4 stages of Zoom enlightenment. And the basic stage is the sage on the stage. Somebody like me sitting here talking at you for an inordinate amount of time with very little feedback and no opportunity for questions or anything like that. And that's the bottom level. Next up is what I call distributed communities. Again, as some of you may be familiar with Brian Alexander's Future Trends Forum, that's a really good example of a distributed community where you have a guest, you have a featured speaker come in, but they don't carry the conversation, the community does. And the community interacts with them directly by asking them questions, and they elicit knowledge from them. Then there's the more traditional workshop format, which is a day-long event or a few hours worth of event, and kind of what we're doing today in a sense, except for one key element. So in a traditional workshop, the idea is that at the end of the day, you've come away with playing with something that changes your perspective on things and helps you grow as an individual. And we want to do that today as well. But it's kind of a contained event. And so it stays, the focus is growing the individual. The last level of this, the last zone of the Zoom enlightenment level is what I call digital constructivism. And the idea here is that you combine that workshop as a series of events instead, and you connect those up with a set of working documents that the group revisits over time with certain prompts that allow us to grow those documents. And so what will persist over the course of the entire summer are these two documents. One is a Miro canvas, the other is a Google Doc, which will gradually grow. And I want to encourage people, and I'll come back to this in a bit at the end, is don't let today's conversation stop just because the clock runs out on the Zoom session. The idea is that we're going to continue to add to these documents over time. Feel free. You can bring other people into the conversation later on. I intend to do that as well. I'm hoping to pull some of our experts in some of these other areas into the game for some of the future sessions, but to keep growing that. And at the end of that, my job as sort of an editor will be to pull all that together and put it into a format that is digestible to a larger audience than the ones that are sitting here today. That is something we can provide as a service from ShapingEDU for the larger community that we're trying to serve. So that's kind of the goal, and hopefully we can work toward that. And what that final piece of the puzzle will look like is still can be changed, and we may end up, it's quite likely it will be changed, certainly in detail. But this was my initial mock-up of what the cover could look like. It just happens to be because I had this photograph and it seemed to work. So New York is full of tools. Bridges are tools. There's tons of tools in this picture. So, okay, so that's what we're doing. Next one's up on June 3rd, 25th. There's the XR one, and then we'll do a fourth one where we try to build anti-fragile environments based on the insights gotten from the first 3 hackathons. That's sort of the game plan long term. So let's talk specifically briefly about today. So I wrote a blog about this, which I published yesterday evening. I was hoping to get it up earlier, but the one tool that wasn't working for me right yesterday was the one between my ears. And so it just wouldn't come. And I did eventually win my battle with the blog. I'm trying to remember, I was listening to an interview with damn it, I keep forgetting his first name. With is it Peter Weir? Oh, Andy Weir. Sorry, Peter Weir's the director. Andy Weir, who wrote The Martian, and he had a great quote. He was on Imaginary Worlds last week. He says, "Give a man a book, you entertain him for a night. Teach a man to write, you give him crippling self-doubt for life." So I was like, yeah, I get that. So, but it did eventually come to fruition. So, I mean, I think the key moment here, the key distinction between today's session and the next session is the idea of everyone coming together at the same place. That power of the moment that we experience in the classroom, in our discussions and our conversations with our students in these Zoom sessions. Or even in individual sessions. I mean, one of the things that I was able to do in the last year with my students was, fortunately, one of the byproducts of all of this, the craziness, is that actually my classes shrunk, and so they were small enough to where I actually set aside a week of class to just meet with everybody individually, sort of midway through the semester, to do a temperature check, to look at their work, give them a chance to ask the questions that they weren't able to do. Again, that still falls into that category. And you can do it as office hours, but you don't have to do it as office hours. But all of these things are, let me change my camera angle here. There we go, that's a little better. All right. This is one of the things you have to think about as, you know, in remote world is, where do you put your camera? You know, having those conversations on all sorts of levels, whether you're talking to a group of students, whether you're talking to individual students, that power of the moment, that's really what we're after. Yes, I do want to, I've been saying that for about a year now, James. I want a camera mounted in the middle of my screen. I'm on 2 screens here, and so, you know, I've kind of split the difference now. I think it's nice to be able to move it around. I feel for people who are trying to exist with just the camera that's on their laptops or something like that. You can't move around. Okay, but yeah, so how do we achieve that power of the moment? And I think that's really what we're talking about. So here's some ideas for some tools. Now, don't feel limited. Don't consider yourself limited to this list of tools. This is a starter kit. And these are some of the ones that we did last year with some extras that I've thrown in, particularly in the blue box. But, you know, projection large. What I mean by that is it can be a big screen, it can be a projector. It's at the front of the room. It's for the faculty member to communicate with the students, right? To share information with the students. Projections small are smaller projection systems. Usually these are TVs, just because having that many projectors in a room just doesn't work. But you can do this with smart boards or some other factors too. But the idea here is that these are projection systems that the students have access to as in groups or something like that. Whiteboard, large and small, same idea. I mean, a whiteboard is a projector with no digital information on it. The whiteboard is a projector where you're scribbling on it. And sometimes that's easier, and sometimes that's just more accessible. But large, again, is for the faculty member. Small would be student, for the students. Furniture that you can move around and reconfigure based on the needs of the moment. Variable size meeting spaces. Again, rooms that you can move around based on the needs of the moment. Those are unusual. I'm not aware of very many institutions that actually do that. But the idea that, you know, one of the things that kind of originally drove the tool set was something I developed for a campus here in Houston, where we wanted to squeeze more people into the room or into the building than the building was designed for. And so I said, well, what you need to do there is you need to do a lot of hybrid instruction, move as much as you can into the virtual world, but then create spaces where faculty and students can get together on the fly and in differing size groups. And so for that, you might need a rooms that can be reconfigured to hold 30 people or maybe 10 people, depending on what the needs of the moment are, right? The flip side of this, by the way, was if you've got a pandemic and everybody has to maintain social distancing, you can take the same size spaces and have fewer people in them too, because it works both ways, right? So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about variable size meeting spaces. Student use science equipment, you know, again, the idea is hands-on material, hands-on stuff, not that it's just the teacher who's demonstrating, but the stuff that students can get their hands dirty with, preferably not with acid, but you get the point. Within the bounds of safety. Student use computing equipment, you know, are there computers in the room for the students to access, especially, you know, we were talking about diversity and inclusion before the session, and, you know, you can't assume everybody's got a device to bring into class. So are there devices there that people can easily access, right? So those are traditional in-person spaces. Video conferencing, there's a whole list of tools there. One of the things to bear in mind is that different tools, one of the different video conferencing tools create different kinds of learning spaces. I go to Zoom because I find it very accessible. WebEx is designed for a business audience, and so it tends to push you more in the direction of Sage on the stage. So that changes the environment of the room. It's just like having a classroom where the chairs are all bolted to the floor versus one where you can rearrange things easily. And then, you know, there's that factor comes into play in virtual spaces as much as it does in physical spaces. interactive concept mapping, like what I was just talking about, what we're going to be doing today. Actually, we're going to be doing some interactive concept mapping. I put Draw.io in here because it's an open resource. We're going to be using Miro today, but I've used Draw.io in the past. It's kind of a close run thing as to which one I decided to use for this. But Laura and Karina are advocates of Miro, so I thought I'd give it a shot. And Google Docs or any kind of live interactive writing tools where people can be working together. So your job in these two documents, and at this point we will split into working groups for about half an hour. There's two documents here, Laura, do you know if other than me, can people screen share or?
No, other than co-hosts, the participants can't screen share.
Well, hopefully everybody can access these tools, and I'll be floating through the groups because
hey, Tom, I'm sorry. This is Brent. Yeah. Laura, I'm going to jump in here. If you go, because this is a meeting, this isn't a webinar. So if a host goes into the share screen thing where there's an up arrow for the menu, go to advanced settings, you can do, everyone can share screen.
Yes, I know you can turn it on. I just,
No, I know, well, because Laura said that we
I think actually, isn't it under security? Yeah, it's under security, actually.
Maybe. Well,
cool.
But it's also under that share screen.
Yeah.
So you might be able to do that. Or make me a co-host and I can try it for you.
No,
cool.
I can do it. So ideally, we don't have to share screens because everybody can be looking at the documents and talking and working simultaneously on the documents. But if for some reason somebody's having trouble accessing or being able to manipulate the documents, then yes, thank you, Brent. Then screen sharing may become necessary. So, but yes, all right, we've turned that on for everybody. Okay. But it is important that I want to try to get as much of this down as possible as our conversations down. I want our conversations to be free flowing as possible. But I do want to make sure we capture things because, as I said, the idea here is that this doesn't end today. Does not end here. Does not end today. Let me find my Miro here. Flip over. Where is it? All right. I hate it when I have too many windows open and Zoom is like not showing me the window I want to see. All right. Let me go back here. Uh-oh, we've already got people in there. Awesome. I see the guest artist and guest painter. It's Miro isn't near as fun as Google. You don't get creative llama and stuff like that, right? In Miro, it's not, but okay. So let me show you guys what I want you to do as you look around here. There we go. All right. Come on. All right. Now everybody should see my screen for Miro as well. So we're going to be working on this left side of the canvas today. So you can see I've broken out traditional and conversational, and I've got the tools listed here. But as you look at the last box here on the bottom, let me zoom into where you can actually read it. Just copy the box and make new boxes. Feel free to mess with this. It's color coded, so that you got the blues and the yellow or tans. And then the idea is that you want to say, okay, well, what can I use this tool for, right? If I want to teach, if I want to show, get my students to do a certain activity, what can I use this tool for? And I'd like you to, use these speech bubbles here to write down at least a brief summary of what does that connection, explaining the connection, right? Or what you're actually doing, and then what does that actually do as an output? Okay, and that's where the red circles come in. So I've already queued up things for the future sessions, so you can ignore the stuff that's on the right side of the canvas and on the bottom because we're only doing traditional and conversational today. All right. And also, we're going to break up into groups. How many do we have right now? I haven't looked. What's our number, Laura?
We've got 14 participants total at the
14.
moment.
Okay, we'll break up into 2 groups of 7 then. And so one group will focus on traditional and one group will focus on conversational. Okay, and we'll take about, let's see, it's 11:36. We're going to do about half an hour. And then we'll come back and we'll look and see what people have done, do a debrief. Also, the Google Doc, there's a link to it again on the Canvas. Here's the stuff with Laurelard. So if you want to figure out what each one of those red things mean. And there's a link to the Google Doc. There it is underneath. That's the long link. And what I'd like you to do on the Google Doc, let me flip over to that real quick. Come on. Nothing is real quick for me today. Okay, here we go. So looking at the Google Doc here, this gives you a little bit more space for exposition. I mean, at a certain level, concept mapping is great to sort of get these connections, right? And so I want to make sure we capture that. But if you feel like you need to write a little bit more, please code each one of your things. You see I have T1, so that would be suggest idea number 1 for traditional. T2, you know, if you want to write out a little bit more, do it on the Google Doc. So I'll clean up the mess. Feel free to get messy. This is finger painting. Have fun. All right. So Laura, let's go ahead and throw people into groups. I will start out in the traditional group, but I will bounce back and forth.
Welcome back, everyone. Tom, you are muted. There we go.
I'm not anymore. I just noticed that. So I guess even as the host, well, that's probably a good thing. You never know what's going on when you jump back into the main room. Okay, so looks like we had a lot of activity on the Miro canvas. That's great. One thing I will ask you guys to be sure to do, I noticed that I think we had 14 people, but I want to make sure that everyone at least puts their contact info on the in the Google Doc. It seems like most of the action was happening in the Miro thing, which is great, and it's fun to play there. But I do want to make sure everybody's on the Google Doc, because that's going to be something that we're used to keep. That'll be the linear expression of what we're doing, whereas the Miro is the two-dimensional expression of what we're doing. And who knows, maybe we can get to 3 dimensions at some point. Well, we are getting to 3 dimensions, actually. We're doing time as the 3rd dimension, not depth. We don't believe in depth here. It's all superficial. Okay, so, all right. Let's take a quick look at what's going on the Miro side here. One thing I had mentioned in one of the groups, and I will mention again, Miro doesn't really capture who did what. So if you put down a bubble, especially the thought bubbles and stuff, put your name in the bubble so that we know who it is. Just sort of keep track of. This also gives me it's not just a vanity thing, but also this is a working document. We're going to be building on this over the course of the next few months, and so I'd like to at least have the ability to go back to the authors of a particular bubble and say, what the hell are you talking about? So I can make sure I get what your intent was. I know it's often very difficult to gauge intent with the amount of space that we have in the Miro bubble. Also, remember that on the one of the things on the Google Doc is so that if you do want to expand on the thought bubbles, you can. There are pages on that to allow you to reference back to a thought bubble and give us a few sentences that would get kind of big and clunky on Miro. I'm trying to achieve the depth that we were just discussing in the group with the Google Doc, whereas the Miro is about breadth. Okay, so one of the things I was thinking about is, as I was writing the blog yesterday, was that one of the things that we do as teachers is that we give them breadth with the readings, but then we provide the depth and the framing, and we zoom in and out. That's part of what we do as teachers, and we hopefully have tools that support our ability to do that and to change the frameworks that the students are working under. Well, as someone, I think, let's see, who was it that mentioned that? As someone mentioned in the group, and we talked about, doing what we're doing right now is something that you could use in a teaching modality, right? Maybe there are other tools out there. Draw.io is free and easily accessible. Educator accounts on Miro are also free. I haven't explored the limits of how far you can go with that, but if you have a .edu address, you can snag a free Miro account with 100 users. I think the main limitation is on named users as opposed to anonymous users. So there are workarounds for that, obviously, like what we're doing right now. I mean, I don't have you guys down as named users, you're all anonymous. So, all right, let's take a look and see what we've wrought here. One of the things I've noticed a little bit with Miro is that the software, and I've had some weird effects with my computer in the last week since I started using Miro, where I think it's just overwhelming the network capacity of the chips in the computer. So, but because I'm sure it's doing a lot of refresh to be able to see this. One of the things I've just noticed just now in terms of doing Zoom with it is also I have a discernible delay with my preview from what I'm saying. So mind the 6-second delay we use.
I'm watching my cursor move on your screen share.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun.
In a lag too, right? I'm
yeah,
sure, right?
but not like it's not the uncanny valley. It's okay.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Let's see. Assign. All right, let's go through some of these. We got about 10 minutes. Actually, before we do that, and if we're going to run out of time, I want to make sure we run out of time with you guys walking away with what you need here. Any questions? Anything come up that made you go, Is the model broken? That sort of thing. Any thoughts from the group? Feel free to chat or speak up. If you don't have any. Does this look like we actually have a foundation to build something on here? A lot of it depends on equipment. Well, I think, okay. I think the answer to that is it depends on how you do it. The overhead necessary for some of this isn't necessarily that big a deal if you plan for it. The cheapest solution for a smart classroom, we've built these the institution I used to work for or still work for as a teacher, but I used to be the technology director. We built the active learning classrooms that MIT and North Carolina developed, and those are $40,000 rooms, and there's a lot of equipment in there, and I've taught in them since then. And one of the things I would say about those rooms, one, the technology has gotten a bit lighter. I think one thing is a big part of that cost was the switching equipment that allowed the students to access the screens wirelessly. And we used conferencing hardware, and I've totally zoned on the name of it now. Barco, that's what it is, like a Barco lounger. That was like 20,000 of that was taken up by various parts of the barcode system. And I found I didn't use it because it was just so clunky most of the time. Occasionally I did use it, but it was so clunky that in terms of getting everybody hooked up or getting a subsection of the students hooked up, even just one student per table, would eat up 5 minutes of time, which I, found annoying. What we used a lot more was the student-sized whiteboards, though. We had whiteboards put in for each one of the tables. And so it was much easier for me to say, here's a dry erase marker, go sketch out your ideas. And then I would photograph the end product and put that up, right? And so that's kind of a guerrilla way of doing what if I had to rebuild that room, I could rebuild that room for a lot less and get 90% of the functionality out of it by simply making sure there was enough whiteboard space for the students to have control over part of it, right? So there are creative workarounds, and some of the things where you find yourself going toward big technology items that are expensive is attacking the problem from the technology side first, instead of, okay, well, what exactly are we trying to do here, right? And that's kind of what this project is meant to do, is to go, what exactly are we trying to do when we're teaching, right? And then working backwards to say, okay, let's figure out the cheapest and most efficient way to do it from a technology perspective. So I get your point, but I don't think it's a prerequisite that this costs a lot of money. The other thing is some of these things can be moved to the cloud. And so as we were discussing in the group session was, giving everybody a screen is nice, and making it so everybody could hook up to the screen, but that's the expensive part. But instead, everybody's already got a screen, bring computers, bring phones, whatever. And you have the interactive part like we're doing here, where it's happening in the cloud. And you get the same effect from a learning perspective as you do, with the cumbersome and complicated and expensive trying to hook a subset of the students up to screens, right?
Tom, can I just jump in really fast on the comment that you made? It's just about everyone has a screen or whatever.
Yeah.
We can't necessarily assume that everyone does have, or they have the right plan or infrastructure plan that can support, using
Absolutely.
it that much or something like that. I just want to bring that up. It's something that's what Laura and I are working on in the UBCs, in the broadband connection group, right? About. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up. We need to be mindful of that. And like if I don't know if anyone knows, but ASU, we did what was called think classes this past year, where we would have 50% of the students come into the class. So starting in the fall, we had students on campus. So, and then 50% were, on home. So do they have the right infrastructure? Do they have that? They were giving out and lending out computers, and even just to, students who would normally use the computer lab and they could no longer do that, and all that type of stuff. So, or if they're on our indigenous land, do they even have access at all? So just
no, absolutely. And I teach community college students, and the infrastructure has definitely been a big issue in the last year as well. And one of the reasons that I think a lot of community colleges bombed in the last year enrollment-wise is that they didn't sufficiently support the technological needs of the students, and that they should have started from that basis and worked backwards to some of the other stuff. I mean, we spent an incredible amount of time on high flex classes, developing them. They never met. And a lot of resources and efforts without a whole lot of discussion about, okay, what's it going to be actually necessary for these students to get on that? And that's the real problem. It's not the, I can't come into campus is the problem. The problem is, can we bring campus to you? Or can we set up campus in a different way where students can access the resources of that campus, like Wi-Fi and computers, in a safe manner, right? In a socially distant manner. I think that would be much more important. To me, that would have been a much more better strategy than spending a lot of time retrofitting rooms so they could teach the high flex model. I think high flex makes a lot of sense for the right group of students, but I don't think community college students or students that are on the margins is that group of students for a lot of reasons. That's a longer discussion. But yeah, so again, the idea here is if we start with what we're trying to do as teachers and then only tack the technology on afterwards, we're gonna look for efficient solutions first. And we're gonna start with questions around equity and access, as opposed to, wow, this looks really cool. We could land our students on the moon and put them on a SpaceX rocket and send them up there. You know, we could do that, right? But are we likely to do that? And that's kind of where I, was talking to James about in his things about, the neural interface stuff, which, this is cool and the stuff we could do. But I'm really worried about this getting to the practical and not jumping steps and saying, okay, these are the steps we need in order to teach better. These are the steps that we need in order to connect with our students, to empower them to be more effective learners, to change the conversation around how we teach and learn, to use the technology to do that, rather than to change the conversation around how we teach and learn in order to fit with some vision of technology that may or may not be practical for 90% of the students and 50% of the institutions out there, right? That's what I've always fought about with people who come in with the latest and greatest. And that's why I've kind of got XR off into its own little section there, because it's going to be more speculative. And because the number of institutions that have effectively implemented XR on any sort of mass scale is pretty small at this point. And the things that you can do with it are still very limited. Technically you could get there, but in terms of scaling it, in terms of making it accessible to those students out on the tribal lands, we're a long way from that. And what can we do for them today? What can we do for them in the next year? That's what I'm concerned about. And so that's why I want to start with these teaching modalities that Diana Laurelard identifies, which are a great way of, she's really good at classifying things. Is a great launching point of thinking about, okay, what exactly are we trying to do here? Can we deconstruct our teaching and make that happen? Okay, all right, I was going to kind of spend some time, we're kind of running a little short on time, which is a good thing. Thanks, James, thanks for coming. I hope you can make the next one. But I wanted to hand the podium over to Ruben. Before I do that real quick, don't forget, let me go back to Keynote here real quick, that this is not the end of the conversation, this is the beginning of the conversation. And so this is what we're working on this summer. Let's keep ideating. The Miro board and the Google Doc will stay alive. I'm going to be monkeying around and cleaning things up. It's okay if you make a mess, I'll clean it up. I have raised almost 5 children at this point, and I'm used to walking around behind people and cleaning up after them. So this would not be a big problem for me. But yeah, get messy, all right? And I will clean it up. The next meeting will be on June the 3rd, where we'll come together and we'll talk about those asynchronous tool sets. And Brent can then talk about, what was it?
My asynchronous tools that I've already put a little sticky note on there.
Yes, the asynchronous tools that he was going on about. And then at the end of June and so on and so forth. So please jump in. All right, real quick, off to Ruben and Laura. Thank you guys. It looks like we got a lot of good stuff done today. Let me stop my share. There we go. Go for it, Laura or Ruben, or some combination.
Wonderful. Well, we've got, it's a busy day for ShapingEDU. We've got another sort of event this afternoon, the broadband project team meeting. Ruben, what are we going to do in that meeting?
All right, so in that meeting, we're going to undertake what's called a Delphi process. In some ways, it's almost the mirror image of what we've been doing here. We're going to be seeing how to aggregate knowledge in a very different way to ask a question, which is the following. It says, okay, so suppose we now get a universal broadband funded as part of the American Jobs Plan. There's many other things that can be funded. How does broadband intersect with these? What should we be looking at? What should we be thinking about developing further, exploring, and so on? So we're going to be going through a process to identify those areas, to identify those intersections. We're going to be looking at the American Jobs and to see what's on the table. And as I say, we're going to be setting up then the basis and the ongoing Delphi process to say from all of these, which ones are the key ones to focus on and why. We're going to be discussing that in much greater detail this afternoon in, let's see, 2.5 hours from now. So if you're interested, Laura, if you'll paste into the chat space the link to that. And I know this, it depends on whether your server caches things or not. You may notice I may say 2 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. It's 1 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time that the meeting is going to take place. So that's again 2.5 hours from now. And if you'd like to join us, we'd love to see you there. So Laura, over to you.
Absolutely. If you want the calendar invite for that meeting, just shoot me an email, laura.geringer@asu.edu. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all your ideas and questions. We'll pick this up in a few weeks. In the meantime, keep dreaming, doing, and driving. Take care, everyone.
Keep editing.
See you all there. Thank you.
Bye, guys. See you this afternoon.